get started, I'm doing the little intro, so as people come in, they won't miss the main course here. So my name is Joyce Mandel. I'm the regional organizer for Abundant Housing Massachusetts, and the AMA team would love to welcome you to this workshop on using data for your pro-housing advocacy. Very, very excited that Tom Hopper and Matija Jankovic are here tonight. First, a little thing about Abundant Housing Massachusetts. As many of you know, we are a statewide organization that is dedicated to pro-housing, that everyone in Massachusetts deserves to have a safe and affordable home. As you know, there's a real housing shortage and crisis in Massachusetts that has led to rising housing costs for apartments and for buying homes. And we believe that more housing and more diverse housing options means more affordability for all, whether it's market rate housing and subsidized affordable housing. We are a membership-based organization. We have over 400 individual members and over 15 affiliate groups. I see some people from our affiliate groups here tonight, and that's really exciting. So we work on the local community level, but we also work on statewide policy. And this year we've introduced the YIMBY bill for that's going through the legislative process right now. So a background about AMA, and I just want to introduce our amazing team tonight. Our Director of Communications is Cheryl Daniel. Cheryl. And Cheryl's recording and going to be doing a lot of background work in this workshop. And then Julia Davidovitz is the other regional organizer. And actually, it's Julia's and my 1-year anniversary today. So we have been in AMA for 1 whole year today. So it's our, as Julia says, it's our AMAversary. So. As you might have seen, yay, thank you so much, Tom. As you see, this is going to be recorded. We are going to put this workshop in our toolkit so people who haven't been here tonight can have access to this information. So without any further talking about anything else, I'm going to introduce Tom Hopper and Matija Jankovic from the Center for Housing Data from the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. But I am going to introduce you, but one little story. Julia and I asked Tom to do this workshop for us last fall to teach us what was happening with Residensity and DataTown and TODEX. I hope I pronounced that right. And we were blown away. Oh my gosh, everyone should know about these tools. They could use them in their advocacy. So thank you so much, Tom and Matija, for coming here tonight. And we are really looking forward to learning from you. So I'm going to pass it along to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joyce. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you to the whole Abundant Housing team for everything you're doing, not just putting together this event and having us, but everything you're doing to organize around MBTA communities and other pro-housing stuff. You're invaluable, great partner, and you've brought together all these great advocates tonight. Matija and I are really excited to be here to talk about using data to inform your pro-housing advocacy. One, because we're data nerds and we love to talk about it and share our tools, but two, because we don't often get a chance to talk directly to activists and advocates in specific communities who live in their communities, want a better future. We're often working with municipalities and other state partners, so this is a special treat for us. I know you came to hear from us and learn about these tools, but we're also hoping to learn just as much from you all. Learning about messaging and data is difficult. We're still learning. We've got some tips and tricks to share with you, but we're hoping to take a few things away too. So we'll have plenty of room for interaction. And we hope that you're ready with some stories and some examples to share with us as well. So bear with me while I share my screen. Here we go. So before we get into today's program, I would like to just provide a short background on the Center for Housing Data at MHP. Our mission is to collect, analyze, and share information to drive better housing policy conversations. We do this in a number of ways, one of which is creating interactive websites that harvest information and give you insights. We do direct data engagement with municipalities and some of our state partners. And you're looking at our team. We're 2 people. We're a small but mighty data team. We're creative, we're problem solving, and we are about to add a 3rd member. So excited to be part of a growing team. But we're part of this broader organization, the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, which is a quasi-state affordable housing organization. And it's about 60 people, and we do a number of things. We provide low-cost, low-interest rate loans for affordable housing multifamily developers. We have a first-time homebuyer program called the One Mortgage. It's absolutely the best deal in the state for first-time homebuyers in low and moderate income households. And we have a community assistance team. Our community assistance team right now, important to know, is conducting a massive technical assistance project for MBTA communities. Might be working with a municipality that you live in. We're working with over 100 municipalities right now on technical assistance, analysis, and planning support around MBTA communities districts. And our team works really closely with the community assistance team. And the Center for Housing Data has formed these community data goals. So anytime we're working with municipal data, we're talking about case making, we're talking about advocacy on the local level. These are kind of the tenets and goals that we hold to. So we conduct research and create tools that will lead to better conversations for you and your neighbors, and ultimately lead to better housing outcomes for you all. We're also really engaged in listening. So we talk a lot with our community assistance partners on our community assistance team. We go to meetings with them. We hear directly from local experience, and we use these insights to drive better tools and better research in the future. And lastly, and maybe the reason why we're here first and foremost, is we love to promote literacy in data and empower more people to feel comfortable using data, have those tools at their fingertips, and use them to really drive change and discuss their hopes, dreams, and vision for housing in their community. So with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about today's session. We're going to start with a brief discussion about the role of data in advocacy. And it might be surprising, we are data people for sure, but we are really attuned to when data is the right tool and when data might be a deterrent or might derail a conversation. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those pitfalls. Then I'm going to do an overview of our first website, DataTown. I'll do a site demo, and then we'll end that with a brief interactive exercise. Then Matija is going to jump in and do the same for Residensity. Residensity is a site that includes information on neighborhood form, neighborhood composition, housing density, and we'll also do an interactive exercise then. And then we've set aside some time for Q&A, and if we've got time, we've got another fun data exploration that we might do together. One more piece of housekeeping before we jump into the presentation. Should you participate, and how should you participate? Yes, please. We would love this to be interactive. We would love to drop the presenter facade quickly and hear from you as well. So if you've got a comment or a question, please don't hesitate. There's a few ways that we would like you to participate. We'd prefer not to have you unmute and just start talking. That can be a little disruptive. So we'd prefer if you place your comment or question in the chat or raise your virtual hand. Matija and I are prepared to pause throughout the presentation to take those questions as it's appropriate. But we've also planned some exercises for interaction. So if you don't have a question or a comment, we are going to request your participation during those parts of the session. So get ready to listen, but also get ready to think and share your experience as well. And lastly, I reserve the right to change this rule at any time. If we're running short on time, we will let you know, and I might ask you to hold your questions till the end. Any questions, comments, or concerns about those rules? Pause for 2 seconds. You got to be fast. All right, we're going to move on. So I wanted to start with a slide about advocacy in local housing efforts and how important it is to creating change. We have these huge regional housing needs, and if you're in this room, presumably it's because you recognize these needs. We have a housing shortage, we have housing cost issues, and we have this huge regional need that we need to address. But we make all these decisions on the local level. We have 351 cities and towns with their own zoning, making their own development decisions. And often the solutions to our regional needs are at odds with local perception and very often at odds with political will. And so municipal staff, other municipal workers can be in a tight spot. It's really hard to find a way to satisfy those local needs and concerns while also meeting regional needs and state expectations. A really tough needle to thread, and getting a good discourse going, hearing from community members requires an informed citizenry, and it requires advocates who are able to start those conversations, steer those conversations, and really impact the way these topics are discussed in your community. But it's not magic. You can't magically do this. Advocates, we need support, we need resources, we need access to quality information. And that access to quality information is why Matija and I are here today. We want you to be able to confidently harness data and integrate that into your vision for the future of your community. And I want to reiterate, data is a tool, and it's not always the right tool for the job. So I'd like to explain this through a little bit of an example. But when I go to my neighborhood association meetings or in other communities meetings, and I imagine when you go to your community meetings, you expect somebody, if you're talking about housing, to say something like, I support affordable housing, or I support multifamily housing, but our schools will be overburdened. We don't have infrastructure to support it, right? It'll harm the environment. Traffic will be bad. And often your first instinct, and my first instinct too sometimes, is, can't we use data to refute this, right? Can't we say, no, we can myth bust this. We know a little bit better. We can accommodate this in our school system. We can get around, you can have multifamily housing on septic. And so there's this instinct to myth bust. But of course we can use data to myth bust, but you should ask yourself a few questions first. Will debating this actually convince somebody who believes all of these things and has them as deep-seated beliefs? We know from research that that kind of tactic often leads people to dig in a little bit more and can turn into a debate. And that debate can take time and energy away from your cause, right? Your pro-housing talking points. And really, is that what you really want to be talking about? And so one exercise that I might encourage you to do is build out your own table, right? All these reasons why we can't have housing need to be complemented with your own vision, your own reasons. What brings you to the advocacy space? What are your values that are leading you to support multifamily housing? So these are mine. Yours might be different. You might have a different angle on yours or different interests, but I support multifamily housing because it could create more affordable options for people who need it. Our downtown needs it. We have empty storefronts. We have struggling businesses, and more housing would cultivate a more lively public realm. I care about dense walkable communities because it reduces congestion and carbon emissions and gives people more freedom of mobility. And I want everybody who participates in our community, our teachers, food service workers, firefighters, municipal staff, not just to work here, but to be able to have the option to live here too. And that's because I don't want a homogenous community, and diverse housing options will help us become a more diverse and complete community. And just like we had data points that could potentially refute these anti-housing sentiments, I'd like to encourage us to use data to support our pro-housing sentiments and not spend time using data to fight this. But how do we do it? It's really hard. And so we don't have any new novel ideas. So we will borrow heavily from a great partner and a great organization called The Case Made. It is headed up by Dr. Tiffany Manuel, or Dr. T to some of her friends and admirers. If you haven't had a chance or haven't been exposed to The Case Made, I encourage you to explore their website. They especially have these great two-pagers on building a coalition, or this one's about the art of the pivot, which we're about to talk about, and building that will and starting to build your own narrative. So check that out on your own time. But the tool and device that we're going to practice with today is called the pivot. And the idea is if you have a cool head, a little preparation, and you've really dialed in on your sense of purpose, you can pivot away from these disruptive comments that could otherwise derail a meeting. And you can steer the conversation back to what you want to talk about, back towards pro-housing talking points and a more positive frame. And the Case-Mate offers us a 3-step process to do that. First, start a list, right? Prepare, know what arguments are going to come to the fore when you start talking about housing in your community, and don't be surprised by them. And as you make that list, start to read between the lines. If somebody says, more apartments are going to make our schools too crowded, what values are they demonstrating when they say that, right? Maybe they care about our schools. Maybe they care about municipal finance and not wanting to be overburdened by cost, right? And find some kind of common ground to relate to. And when you validate some portion of someone's comment, it's incredibly disarming. And if you can validate and find that common ground, but then restate it, and this is step 2, restate it as a positive. You can start to take the same point, find a point of agreement, but chart a new course towards something a little bit more positive. And then step 3 is take that pivot, that bridge statement, and then just follow that road right back down to your messaging point. If that seems abstract or not well described, don't worry. We're going to have some examples very soon to work through, and we will reiterate these steps and we'll work through them together. But this is the device that we're going to use today in some of our exercises. But first, we're going to talk about our first website, which is DataTown. And I'd like to start by talking a little bit about why we created this site and what it really includes. So early in the Center for Housing Data's life, in about 2017, we started getting a lot of requests for municipal information. What's the school enrollment in Concord? How much multifamily does Natick have? And we found ourselves pulling the same information in the same way for a lot of different communities. And we said, wait, we can automate this. We can just create a website that does all of this work for everybody and then just serves them up charts and data and all of this stuff. So that's what we did. And don't want to belabor it, don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, but if you've ever gone to work with US Census Bureau data or any local data really, you'll often find, yeah, the data's there, but it doesn't always feel accessible. If you've been to data.census.gov, for example, it's hard to find what you want. When you do, it downloads in a weird format. You've got to manipulate it, put it in a chart. And if you're not a data professional, that can be a real deterrent. And so we're data professionals, and we thought, great, let's cut out that step, give you something a little further down the conveyor belt, the assembly line. So we've cleaned and downloaded numerous data sets from multiple sources, and we've made them available for you at the click of a button for any one of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. We're also on the fly generating charts and graphs, and we include all the sourcing information, statistical error bars, and other important information that data people often put on their charts, but are often really not captured by non-data folks. So you don't ever have to worry about citations or sourcing. We've got that all for you. Not only do you have the ability to look at one community, but you can also compare across multiples. And lastly, we've got coaching text so you don't get lost, and some explainers on the data sources so that you know what you're looking at. And with that, please bear with me. I'm going to just switch over to our browser, and we're going to do a live walkthrough of the DataTown website. Thanks for your patience. So when you arrive at DataTown, you land on this homepage, which gives you some helpful information, including what we've recently updated, any new data that we've added to the site, anything that's upcoming. We've got some contact information, some social media links, and some background on why we created the site and what we hope it does for you. But I'd like to direct you here to the left side of the browser, where we've got our main navigation bar. The first thing you're greeted with is an option to either explore one community or compare communities. We'll go through both of them together, but we're going to start with the one community. It defaults to Boston, but for X, we're going to choose a random community. I'm going to go with Wellesley because it's just what popped into mind. And what you didn't see is when I chose Wellesley, behind the scenes, our massive database all filtered down all this juicy data for Wellesley, and it's just waiting there for us to look at and start to glean some insights. So I'm going to quickly expand these major topics on the left. You'll see we've got information on demographics, on housing stock, jobs and labor force, as well as some other topics like school enrollment and municipal finance. And when we start clicking on those, we'll see we've got a little bit of coaching text and chart pops up immediately. And we can see on the x-axis, we can analyze population in Wellesley all the way going back to 1930 through 2020. On the y-axis here, just to help with a little bit of interpretation, we've got the number of people in the community. And you can see, like a lot of suburban communities, Wellesley saw a lot of population growth, especially in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, but has since kind of leveled off and seen only modest growth since. If we put in a different community, for example, let's pick Watertown. It will take a second, and I suspect that the sites may be a little bit slower because we might have some folks playing along at home. So while we wait for Watertown to come up, I do want to show a few other features here. For example, we mentioned you can download a chart at the click of a button. And here's that button. When you click download chart as an image, again, I think we're having we're overloading the server a little bit with all this participation, which is great. Keep playing on the site. But what happens when you click this is it will automatically go into your downloads folder. You'll see a little alert here. And you'll be able to just pick up that image, copy and paste it into a presentation, into a document, into a social media post, or anything else that you're hoping to look for, to use it for. Additionally, I mentioned you can download community data. It will give you all of these data points on the chart in a CSV file, so you can take that, run your own analysis, or use the numbers for something else. I'm just going to go back and navigate through a few more of these so that you can see some of the other information we have. We have the age distribution for your community. So we've got age groupings down here on the x-axis and the percentage of population here on the y-axis. And so for Watertown, for example, you can see we've got a bar for the state and a bar for Watertown. We can see that Watertown, compared to the state, has fewer school-age children, more young adults, and maybe fewer, middle-aged adults. I'm reluctant to choose another community because of the speed, but let's pick on Wellesley again and look at a different age distribution. Much faster. You'll see Wellesley, by contrast, has much lower levels of young adults, has a higher percentage of school-aged children. And my favorite thing about the age distribution section of the website is you can explore it over time. Has the distribution always been this way? So for Wellesley, let's take a look back. No, 1990, it was very different. We've got, this looks like more college-age students. We maybe have a little bit less in terms of young adults here, but not quite as exacerbated as it is here in the most recent estimates. But we can also explore how that shifted over time. So if you click on 2000, you'll start to see the demographics shift right as the population ages. And you'll see it again. It's almost like a little wave as you see folks in these 30s to 40s start to age and move into their 40s and 50s. And so you can almost paint a little narrative about where you've been in terms of age distribution and project out as time passes and as folks in your community age, what's going to happen to your demographics. So it's a fun tool to use. Just to highlight a few other features on the site, we have information on tenure mix, so renters versus owners. We have information on the income distribution of renters versus owners. You'll notice in Wellesley that the majority of homeowner households make over $150,000 or more, so it is very expensive to purchase and own a home in Wellesley. We've got housing costs. You can see that owner Costs of over 3,000 or more are the norm, and so it explains some of the high income owners in the town. And lastly, we have some information on affordability and how many renters and owners are cost burdened. To quickly highlight a few more sections, we have race and ethnicity. We have housing inventory, so multifamily versus single family, when your housing was constructed, your building permit rates, multifamily and single family. Wait for this to populate. There you go. Information about labor force participation and employment, occupations and industries, commuting patterns. And some of my favorite ones are here in the other topics. One of the crowd favorites is usually school enrollment, because schools come up a lot when you're talking about housing. And in many cases, we've seen declining school enrollment in many of our suburban neighborhoods. So it's always kind of a fun chart to look at. And in Wellesley, you can kind of see that decline in school enrollment. We've got municipal finance, and this will give you revenue sources for your community, as well as expenditures and categories. So I am just going to check the chat here. Oh, great questions. Okay. Confidence interval. If you're wondering what a confidence interval is, we actually have information on the website that will produce that for you. So there's two kinds of census products. One are census counts, and that's your decennial census. It's giving you, actual counts, or as close as we can get to actual counts of people in your community. But the census also puts out the American Community Survey, and that is a sample of the population. And because it's a sample, you need to do these statistical calculations about how sure you are about that estimate. And the confidence interval more or less measures your confidence in that estimate. So for example, on this bar, the confidence interval is telling us that although we have an estimate of 14.4%, actually the estimate is most likely between 13% and 15.8%. There's got to be a little bit of wiggle room in that estimate. And if you want more information, we do have a pop-up that will take you to the methodology from the Census Bureau and explain a little bit about confidence intervals. Tools for regressions. We do not have tools for regressions. However, we would encourage you to take our data and use it in regressions. We do use tidy data format, which is a little bit of data speak, but it makes sure that the data is in an easy format for analysis and other data scientists. All right, we're running low on time, so I think I'm going to stop sharing on DataTown and return back to the presentation. So bear with me again as we toggle between the two. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we hope you use the site. So one way is on social media. DataTown is very shareable. This is why we created it. We want you to take these charts, we want you to download them, and we want you to talk about housing using them. And so here's a sample of some tweets that have been posted, or not tweets anymore, I guess. We're living in old school here. But social media posts since DataTown was put out, including one by former Salem mayor and now Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, using some of this information to say, hey, I noticed this in my community. It's a little bit troubling, and can't we do better? Can't we do something different? And so encourage you to get on social media and share these tools. But let's move forward to maybe a more in-person example. And I'd like to do a little bit of an exercise and maybe practice the pivot with you all. So imagine this, you're at a town meeting and it looks something like this. I used, if you've seen Towns and Rec, you know that it's a great example of public meetings. This is actor and comedian Billy Eichner yelling in Leslie Knope's face. That is A.B. Poehler's character. And I'm imagining that this is at a meeting about a new multifamily zoning bylaw, and that Billy is yelling that multifamily housing will tank our schools and our budgets with all those new kids, something that we have very often seen and heard in our community meetings. But you're not fazed by this, right? Because you've been to DataTown, you've done your research, and so you know that school enrollment in your town has actually been declining for many years, and your enrollment is well below peak levels. I'm using Weston as an example here. On future slides, I'm using other towns, so I'm not speaking about any specific town in this hypothetical. So that's one thing you've noticed. You also know that, oh, we actually have less than our share of young school children in our town compared to the state. And actually, we've got a dearth of young adults, right? Is that a problem? And you also know that, hey, actually, we do have some multifamily housing and it hasn't hurt us yet. And although we're mostly single family housing, we have friends, we've got neighbors, we've got community members who are living in multifamily housing. And you also know something that might be a little inconvenient, that although your enrollment is declining, your local spending on education is increasing. And I include this example here because sometimes it's really tempting to pick and choose data points that make your point. But I'd like to encourage you to address facts that might seem inconvenient because there are opportunities to learn a little bit more, to understand some of the competing pressures. And if you can understand those competing pressures and work in ways to navigate around them, that's going to make you a more effective advocate. Okay, so you learned all this stuff, you've got all this information, and it would feel so good to say, Billy, you're so wrong, and here's all the reasons why. But we know that that might not be the most effective strategy, so we're going to pivot. So, reminder, step one, we're going to identify the frame being used and read between the lines to find a shared value. We're going to reaffirm that shared value, but restate it in a positive frame. And then we're going to use that frame to return the conversation to our message and our sense of purpose. So I've gone ahead and created my own example of how I might pivot, actually two. I might say, hey, Billy, I'm also worried about age demographics in our community, but we've had trouble bringing in new families and our school enrollment has actually dropped as a result. If we can't regenerate our community with new families and children, we run the risk of becoming an aging community with fewer prospects for the future. That's one way to go. Another way to go is more personal. And this is not my story, I made it up, but I can imagine somebody else having a story similar to this and saying, you're right, we do have great schools, and it's been so important for me to live in a community where children can thrive. But my adult child's looking for a home in the community and would love for their own kids to grow up here, but they're unable to find an affordable place to live. And so I support multifamily housing because my family is important to me and they need different housing options than what we have to offer. So that's an example of how I would pivot. I would love to pause now and see if anybody in the crowd, in the audience, would love to offer an alternative frame or give the pivot a shot. I'm willing to wait, but also willing to call on a friend. So hopefully we get a volunteer. Oh, fantastic. Maxwell, please jump in.
No, I too am very concerned about the budget, and I think I think we need by having some smart growth and development or transit-oriented housing, we'd be able to sort of fill sort of that create extra revenue, sort of fill some of those budget holes, and then we'd definitely be able to sort of tackle some of those issues that you're addressing.
Brilliant, right? Dead on, right? We care about budget, of course we do. And development brings income. Multifamily developments pay taxes and are often very revenue positive. And so what a great point to bring up. Anybody else have other thoughts? Okay, you're going to get a few more chances at this over the course of the presentation. So I'm actually going to pause there. And because we're running a little bit past time, I did have another example here. It was Moira Rose. It was going to be a crowd favorite. We can go back to it if people feel like it. But for now, we're going to move forward onto Residensity. So I'm going to pass things over to Matija, who's going to walk us through the Residensity site. Over to you, Matija.
Awesome. Can everybody hear me? Hopefully,
Yes,
okay.
you sound great.
Great. Awesome. So I'm gonna give you all a little bit more information about Residensity, which is the second website we've developed that we'll be showcasing in this presentation. Next slide, please. So here you can find a link to Residensity, and below is just a screenshot of the site. We'll also link this in the chat, so if you miss it here, don't worry. But just a quick overview. Oh,
sorry.
last slide. Residensity is an interactive web tool that allows you to explore and analyze housing unit counts and residential density for any location in Massachusetts. You can explore individual developments, and you can also explore the density of custom neighborhood areas that you define yourself. And we'll go into a little bit more detail during the demo and show you some examples of people using Residensity in the field. Next slide, please. So just to back up for a second, I did just want to talk a little bit about why we decided to create Residensity and just what was the motivation behind this data set and this data tool. So Residensity was preceded by our TODEX project. TODEX stands for the Transit Oriented Development Explorer, and this was a project that we released in 2019. So TODEX measured density patterns in the half-mile areas near transit stations. And it was only in those locations, which was what we were focused on seeing how our state is doing in terms of developing housing in these smart locations. We released TODEX alongside a research brief that found on average residential density was really low near our transit stations with an average of 6.6 homes per acre across our transit system. But as you can see in this graphic right here, the majority of stations are really, really low. So there's just a lot of single family homes and just really a lack of multifamily development around a lot of our transit stations. So TODEX was a super successful advocacy tool that helped tell the story about missing housing near transit accessible locations. It also played a really important role in the development of 3A. However, the drawback to TODEX was that it was limited to these predefined areas. So we thought, what would happen if we made it possible to explore density patterns anywhere in Massachusetts and to put that tool into the public's hands for advocacy purposes? And so that's kind of where the motivation for Residensity came from. Next slide, please. So why do we care so much about Residensity or about density? And I won't spend too much time belaboring this point since we're in a room full of housing advocates, but just to quickly frame our discussion, we believe that increasing residential density can help provide a variety of housing options to our communities. It can create more opportunities for affordability, and it can take pressure off our constrained housing markets. And this in turn can lead to more diverse communities and housing access to more individuals and families, while at the same time making our communities more walkable and improving transit access, and also lowering our community's climate impacts. Next slide, please. However, most of us don't really have a great mental gauge for density. In the context of Section 3A, there's been a new focus on quantifying and measuring density. And that's because the law requires a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre in these new MBTA zoning districts. And so we want to make it a little bit easier to answer that question. What does 15 units per acre look like in my community? By themselves, these kinds of numbers like 15 units per acre don't really mean much, and they need some translation. So we think it's particularly helpful to explain these metrics within the context of our communities that we're familiar with. So maybe there are individual developments that are 15 units per acre. Maybe there's a neighborhood area that's 15 units per acre, and these are the kinds of things that I think really help give context in a community meeting setting. Next slide, please. And really quickly, just before I talk about Residensity's features and what you can do with the site, I just want to take a really quick step back and explain some of the important terms and concepts that we'll be using while discussing Residensity. We'll mention parcels and lots quite a bit when talking about Residency. So just want to say the simplest way of understanding parcels and lots, in a lot of ways, these terms are interchangeable, but generally they refer to the piece of land that's associated with a single building or development. So when we're thinking about your house, we're not thinking about your house's footprint, we're thinking about the land that's associated with the house. It's more something that a tax assessor would be thinking about. This land is owned by this homeowner and the house exists on this land. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if anybody needs any extra help, just let me know. But we use parcels as sort of the unit of measurement for a lot of density. It's kind of the base. Next slide, please. I also just want to quickly cover the different ways of measuring density. So when we talk about parcel density, also known as net density, this refers to the density of a single lot. So in other words, if a lot is 1 acre large and has 3 units on it, the net density is 3 units per acre. Neighborhood density, or also known as gross density, refers to the density of an entire area. So in this image here, what you'll see is there's a shape drawn over a bunch of parcels. Gross density refers to the total number of units in that area divided by the total acreage of that area. So that's including rights of way, that might be including a park. So that's just an important distinction. I hope that helps just frame a little bit of what we're talking about when we're talking about density in our tool. Next slide, please. So with all that in mind, I'm just going to talk through what Residensity actually does. Residensity allows you to explore housing unit counts and measure residential density anywhere in Massachusetts. It has unit count estimates, density calculations, and use descriptions for every parcel of land in Massachusetts. It also allows users to measure density statistics for any user-defined neighborhood in the state and export data through an easy-to-use user interface. And so we developed this database of 2.1 million parcels with all this information. And the motivation behind this website was creating an easy way of accessing this information. You can just click through it, that you can create an area and get some information, and that you can just export it and work with it, either in your research, in your advocacy, and social media posts, and anything like that. So with that, I'm going to jump into a really quick tour of our website and give you a demo on how to use Residensity. And just bear with me while I share the screen. Looks like I'm sharing. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Yes, okay, awesome. Okay, so this is what you see when you open up Residensity. You're greeted with this splash screen. It has a little bit of coaching text on how to get started, but we'll just click enter. And in this main view, we can see a map of all municipalities in Massachusetts with a color gradient based on their community-wide levels of density. So you can see the more dense communities like Boston, Worcester, Greater Springfield, a couple of these places, Lowell and Lawrence, start to stand out. And you can click on any of these municipalities to get some top-level statistics about density in these communities. For this demo, I'm going to be sticking with Newton as just an example. If you click on Newton, you can get some really quick information. Hopefully this isn't too small. I wish I could make it a little bigger, but I'll read a lot of this stuff out. So community is Newton. The average residential parcel density in Newton is about 5.5 units per acre. The predominant housing use is single family. The second most common is 2-family. And then there's a little bit of information on how the population has changed, total housing units, and so on. But to actually use Residensity, the really interesting stuff is if you zoom in and look at parcels. So if I want to look at Newton Center, for example, I can zoom in and find Newton Center, or I can go into the search bar and I can just type in Newton Center. And as I'm typing it in, it's going to give me the option. Here's Newton Center, it popped up. If I click on it, it's going to bring me to this view. So what we're seeing here, this is a map of all the parcels in Newton, specifically around Newton Center. And over here on the left-hand side, I can open up the legend and I can see sort of what the map is showing me. So again, the darker parcels represent higher density, up to 30 plus units per acre. And these light parcels represent 1 or less than 1 unit per acre on the parcels. One thing that you can see in this view is sort of the way that the density, the parcel density in Newton is kind of distributed. So what we might notice is along the commuter rail, there's quite a bit of density. that's built up along the commuter line and the same along the green line. There's a little bit more higher density concentrated around these areas. In certain parts, like here in West Newton, the density is really low. So these look like single family homes on relatively large lots, whereas in these areas, we might be seeing some higher density homes, some apartment buildings or condos on relatively smaller lots. And to explore a parcel, all you have to do is zoom in and click on any of these parcels. So one that's standing out to me here is this one darker parcel that's surrounded by some lighter low density parcels. If I click on it, it's going to tell me this is 1090 Walnut Street in Newton. The use description tells me what it is. It's a condominium development with an estimated 10 residential units on a parcel that's about 0.43 acres large, giving it a parcel density of 23.5 units per acre. Another thing, I can just click on another parcel. And I'm so sorry for how small the text is. Hopefully, when you do this on your own computer, it'll be a little bit easier to see. But here's another parcel I'm selecting. It's right down the street, 1073 Walnut Street in Newton. It's a single family home with only one unit on a parcel that's about 0.36 acres large, giving it a parcel density of about 2.82 units per acre. So relatively similar parcels in terms of their size, but very different uses. One has a lot more units, one's a condo, and one is single family with only one unit. Okay, one other thing that you can do with Residensity is instead of looking at individual parcels, you can also use our neighborhood analysis tool that I'm going to select up here, neighborhood analysis. I can create a polygon to represent a hypothetical neighborhood area that I'm interested in and get some density statistics on the neighborhood that I drew. So I'm clicking draw polygon. And you can make your neighborhoods as simple or as complex as you like. I'm going to make it a little bit more complex just to, I don't know, make a point about this being interesting and adaptive data tool. So you draw your polygon, double click. And if I click on district, it's going to select out just those parcels and give you some specific information on what's in that neighborhood area. So what we're seeing in this area that I drew, there are 247 units of housing in this area that I drew. The shape that I drew gives me the neighborhood area of about 52.46 acres and a neighborhood density of about 4.61 units per acre. There's also a breakdown of the parcels in the neighborhood that I drew, and it's telling me what's in it. So in the area that I drew here, there's actually a lot of condominium developments that represent the majority of residential units in this area. There's 96 condominium units. There's also a bunch of two-family homes, quite a bit of single-family homes, some three-family homes, and so on. And once I'm done with this, if I want, I can just export a map of what I drew. I'm going to click print map, and this is a little bit finicky. It relies on GIS service. So most of the time it'll give you a map. Sometimes it won't. But I'm going to see if it prints a map anyway. Okay, here it is. Great. And then after drawing your district, you can export a map just like this. It's pre-formatted with a legend at the bottom, and then that same table that I showed you with what's actually in this neighborhood to the left. So this is something you can take with you and maybe show at a community meeting. You can post about, maybe this is your neighborhood, you can post about it on social media and just talk about what you're seeing. You can also download each record of all the parcels using the parcel CSV button. It'll give you a table of everything that's in the neighborhood you drew. You can download these stats along with the parcel breakdown in the stats button. And if you're a GIS user, you can download the actual geospatial data. So the shapefile containing all of these parcels and use it in software of your choice. There's one other thing I want to share. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. And if anybody has questions, we'll have some time at the end to answer. Tom, do you think we have time to show the distance buffer tool? Should we keep going?
I was about to just interrupt and say that we are running low on time. I might suggest that we just go back to the PowerPoint to show
Okay.
a few of those examples and then head right into Q&A in the next couple minutes. Sorry, Matija, I took
Sounds
up
good.
so much
No
of our
worries.
time.
No worries. And if anybody would like a little bit more help with using Residensity, I mean, feel free to reach out to Tom and I. We'd really be happy to take some time and show you how to use the site one-on-one. So really quick, yeah, just moving forward, we've put a lot of effort into making our data shareable and easy to access from our data tools. So one way, like Tom mentioned for DataTown, that we hope you'll use this data is to share it on social media and start conversations about density in your community or elsewhere. And these are a couple examples that we've pulled from the wild to show you all. I think, Tom, it might make sense to just jump into the example. Okay, so this is like Tom's example. This is, a way that you might use Residensity in one of your meetings. So let's say you're at a community meeting about a proposed 40 unit per acre development near your town's commuter station. You might hear somebody say, this development doesn't belong, it's too big and it doesn't match our town's character. So this is something that we've heard from advocates. They've been able to use Residensity to respond to these to these types of concerns raised in meetings. So next slide, please. In this example, let's imagine we're advocates working in Wellesley, Massachusetts. So you explored your community in Residensity and you found out that your town already has several developments that are about 40 units per acre. Not only that, these are developments that you and your community are familiar with, and they're examples. These examples that you pulled are two mixed-use developments that are near transit in your community. Your community also enjoys these two developments because they provide various amenities to the town. They have some ground floor local businesses, restaurants, and so on. So the two examples I pulled are 586 Washington Street, 312 Washington Street. I paired this up with some images from Google Maps Street View, along with some of the statistics that we pulled from Residensity. But basically, these are two examples that are relatively high density. So if somebody's talking about 40 units per acre for a development in a meeting, you can show them this example and say, well, 586 Washington Street, it's a great mixed-use development that has a variety of restaurants and local businesses. It's not very imposing, with 2 floors of residential and some ground floor commercial, and it's just a really comfortable and walkable feeling community. And the same with this other example. It's a little bit more of an apartment style, but it has a mixed use. On the right side, that's a local restaurant, and there's some outdoor dining as well. So it's something that the community already has. It doesn't necessarily not fit with the community's character. And these are the kinds of things that you might be able to glean from by using Residensity. Next slide, please. Another thing you can do is you can search the area around a transit station. So let's say the new development is being proposed near the Wellesley Hills commuter stop. And you can communicate to the community and say, looking at the area near Wellesley Hills, we can see that the majority of developments in this area are single-family homes. So in this half-mile buffer around the commuter station, it's mainly single-family homes. But we think there's just an opportunity to add some new housing in this transit accessible area. There's also quite a bit of commercial development along the main street here, Washington Street, that might benefit for rezoning to allow for some mixed use development down the line. So using Residensity, you can kind of see the current land use patterns, and you can see you can kind of benchmark where your community is in terms of residential density. Next slide, please. And yeah.
Yeah, I might just jump in here and say, let's go right into Q&A. But if somebody is feeling a burning desire to test out the pivot, and offer a pivot here on this statement of this development does not belong, it's too big and doesn't match our character. That's a great way to participate. But while you're summoning the courage to try the pivot, I'm just going to go to a few of the questions that are in the chat. We've got a few minutes left. Alexis is asking, it's not the housing itself always, but also sometimes the cost of new developments and concerns of affordability and rental rates. And oh my gosh, what a great thing to be able to talk about. If any of you saw the spotlight piece in the Globe, I think it was last month, they wrote about this $600,000 problem where between land costs and development costs, developers can't actually produce housing at reasonable rents and a reasonable rate of return, right? And so there is this huge impediment in the cost of developing housing, and that is another parallel problem that we need to solve along with political will, along with all these other things. It's going to take a confluence of efforts. I'm not a real estate expert, so, I can't necessarily speak to all the dynamics and development costs and rate of return. That's not my area of expertise. But it is an intractable problem here, and it's, incredibly hard to build anything but luxury housing in a lot of the inner core. So no answer there, just more thoughts and commiseration, I think. And then we had a question from Barnaby, I think, about the granularity of the DataTown data. It is community level. It is really hard to find anything smaller than community level in Massachusetts. We have some municipalities that are, 1,000 people, under 1,000 people. And because we have to rely on samples and statistical samples, the census doesn't really offer anything usable lower than that. We're working on some census tract information in our next launch and revision of DataTown. And so in many places, you will be able to drill down at a slightly smaller geography. Great. I'm just I saw somebody ask for our emails, so I've got our contact information here. We've got some links to our websites, and I'm gonna stop there. Please reach out. Joyce, I saw you raised your hand. Please jump in with any closing thoughts. Sorry for eating up all the time, but thanks for having us.
I think Julia's going to close out, but I do have a question after Julia closes out, and people can feel free to leave.
Yeah, just really quick. Thank you all so much for coming. And thank you so much to Tom and Matija. That was amazing. And I know people still have questions, so I'll be brief. But I did drop my email, Joyce's email, and Cheryl's email in the chat. And I think Tom and Matija will also provide their emails. And the recording of this will be posted in our Abundant Housing Massachusetts MBTA Communities Resource Toolkit. And there's a link to that in the chat also. So if you have to jump off right now and you can't wait for the Q&A, you can watch that back later. And we'd also really love your feedback on this event so that we can tailor future events to be even more amazing. So there's a link to that in the chat as well. And I will throw it back to Tom and Matija for question and answer.
Great. Thanks all. And if you've got more questions, please chime in. If anybody wants to go back to that pivot exercise and give it a shot, we're happy to do that. Joyce, go ahead.
Yeah, Tom, this is Tom and Matija. This is awesome. When Tom, when you were walking me and Julia through this, we could take like some property and actually see what it looked like and then use Residensity. Is that something that, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I thought that was really amazing. Is that something that you can help us with?
Sure. Maybe Matija, do you want to go back to your example here? So, Residensity itself does not give you the ability to look at the street view of a property, but it will help you identify those properties that you might want to look at on a street view. And so using Google Maps, Street View, we've used Google Earth a whole bunch too to get an aerial view of the neighborhood so that, piece of data this many units, this density doesn't mean anything to anyone. We don't know what an acre looks like. Nobody has like a great mentally formed image of an acre. And so you do need to show these examples. And so we do really recommend using Residensity to find some examples and then going off the site and amassing some other resources that demonstrate what this looks like on the ground. So Matija, maybe let's walk through your example one more time.
You reshare.
I thought I was sharing. That's horrible. All right.
Sorry. But we're also thinking about if there's a way to include like a direct link to Google Maps that if you click on the parcel, it'll be somewhere in there that you can just go straight to the Google Maps Street View. I think pairing it with a real picture is really helpful. So Tom, if you can go to the next slide. We have a bunch of examples like this. I think these are things that are really helpful to include in a community meeting, but it generally starts with a little bit more of the work is on you to find a development that you're interested in Residensity that maybe communicate something that you want to share with folks at a meeting. The way I did this is I just was looking through Wellesley and found two communities that were two developments that were higher density, and then looked them up in Google Maps for me to get a sense of what they looked like. So I know that the messaging that I'm trying to put forward, that these are good mixed use developments and that a community might be comfortable with them actually lines up with the reality. So it's not the most helpful answer, but if you start with Residensity and find something that you're interested in, it's helpful to pair it with, you know, something like Google Maps and just see what that development looks like in real life.
And, you know, this is the technique that we use because we don't know each and every community in the Commonwealth, but you know your community, right? You know the neighborhood people like, you know your downtown, you know where people hang out. And so find examples that, you know, fit that context and fit how people use and view your neighborhood. If you've got a town center that looks like this on the left, this mixed use, chances are your zoning no longer allows something like that, right? And it's an opportunity to say, we maybe just need to change our zoning to allow what we've always allowed, to allow these neighborhoods that we have and cherish and love. And zoning is a great tool for us to be able to build on that foundation and rebuild on that foundation. Because when you zone under pre-existing non-conforming, it provides more opportunities for redevelopment as well, which a lot of our downtowns sorely need. Any other questions? Oh, Nate, please.
Hi, guys, this was an awesome presentation. Thanks a lot. Tom, I appreciated your suggestion about making sure to address inconvenient facts. That gets kind of tricky sometimes because sometimes I don't know how to explain them or understand them. And I feel like I go down rabbit holes because I think it's really important. Like in yours, you showed Weston, you know, it showed declining enrollment, but increasing education spend overall. And sometimes knowing why that spend's going up is really relevant to bring to that conversation and not to focus on that one example, but how to, dig into I don't know if DataTown has any general direction for how to explore inconvenient facts when you find them, because that can be pretty tough to kind of figure out how to connect the dots.
Yeah, and it is really tough, right? And so sometimes it's using what you get in DataTown and the insights you find to research offsite too. I mean, we can't include everything here. We can't include every piece of data. And so if I were working in Weston and trying to make a case and I found this, you know, it might make me react differently when somebody says, I'm worried about our school budget, because okay, yeah, maybe you should be, right? And maybe it doesn't have to be a deterrent. Maybe we don't have to stop housing just because we've got increasing education costs, but that's something that we also need to do. It's a yes and, right? And we can do multiple things at once. We can solve multiple problems at once. We can't use one issue to be a barrier to another issue solution, right? And so I think it's acknowledging that and being truthful about the reality of it. You don't even have to necessarily understand it. It's your framework for what you're advocating for doesn't change in this reality. And you shouldn't be afraid of validating somebody else's fear because that might feel good to them, right? It might be an opportunity to say, you know what? You're right, our education costs are increasing, but we shouldn't be focusing on the kids in multifamily housing. That's not what's creating our budget issues. So yeah, let's work on our municipal budget. Let's think about how we're spending money. But let's also think about the housing we need at the same time. Not a great answer. I know it's really tricky, but
Yeah, I wasn't trying to focus too much on that one specific example, but yeah, that's a great, I thought that was a great response. Thanks.
sure. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Anybody want to share something that they've heard at a community meeting that they don't know how to respond to? And we might not either, but we could commiserate maybe. Gosh, I mean, sharing horror stories is like everybody's favorite thing. Very quiet group. Okay, yeah, I'll let you off the hook.
It's late at night.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, fitting our character. This doesn't fit our character or what we're dealing with, and the train doesn't. This is not really rapid transit. I'm sorry, I have Milton on the brain, so.
Oh, for good reason. Yep. Katie, you came off mute, so you've got something
I
pressing
was
to say.
eating, I'm sorry. I think the character pivot that I've heard done most successfully is I agree, I really love our town. And the parts I love so much are like Wellesley Center, where it's, I mean, like what I love about our town is I can walk and go to my church and do some shopping or whatever. What density is that? I mean, I think a lot of people forget that the parts of the town they really like are the densest. But back to horror stories, was at a meeting recently where people said, some guy just got up and said, all this new housing from 3A, that's where they're going to put all the immigrants. And even an anti-density person got up and said, now wait, that's not true. That's a lie. That just sort of pushed it over the edge. So that was a good horror story.
That is a good one. Barnaby, I saw you come off mute too.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm in Gloucester. I'm a blow-in. I'm not, I'm American now, but I haven't been here forever. But one of the things that happened to us is that one of the local councillors very early on in the proceedings told everybody that building to the minimum requirement, the minimum capacity requirement was a requirement. So we had to, and I've been trying for a year and a half, nearly 2 years, to kill that zombie argument dead, but it just keeps coming up. And I know people are afraid. Fear is the biggest fear of what's coming, and fear of change that people don't understand is the biggest driver of resistance that I can see. And I was just wondering if you've come across that elsewhere, where people assume that it's going to be this many thousands of new homes and 11,000 new people and all that kind of nonsense. But how do you pivot from that?
Again, still learning here too, right? And so, the way I would think about fear, someone who's operating out of fear is really hard to convince. And so I would not try to convince that person, right? But there's going to be other people in the room. There's going to be other people who are maybe more open and accepting to a different framework to understand the issue. And that's where doing your homework and really solidifying your own perspective and your own values and practicing articulating those can be a really great way to not only pivot, but offer people something a little bit more optimistic to look at, and maybe a little bit more of a sense of purpose.
Okay, thank you. That's great. As long as you didn't say what because I've been kind of doing that, and I'm glad that you've sort of said it's an approach, so I won't worry so much.
Listen, I've been in a neighborhood association meeting where I've fallen into the trap of, debating with someone, something that I shouldn't, right? And, toe for toe going with the opposition, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So I do just want to hit on a couple of the comments that are in the chat because I wasn't paying great attention there. Chelsea mentioned traffic. Gosh, we didn't mention traffic once, but in my neighborhood in Boston, it's all anybody wants to talk about. Everyone's traffic but yourself, right? Everybody, nobody else should have parking but you, right? You're entitled to public space for your 2-ton vehicle right in front of your house, right? These are really tough frames of entitlement, of cultural conditioning around cars and entitlements around cars, really hard to get around. I thought I saw one more hand. Was it you, Max?
It was. I don't want to take up the. I want to be able to share the air. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to say I was looking up in my town of Franklin. We have this really beloved new coffee shop, Birchwood Cafe, and I looked it up, and it's 20 units per acre. Everyone loves it. It's very popular. Everyone goes there. So I'm gonna come to them. We need more Birchwoods. So
Exactly. Yeah, exactly how we hope you use our tools, right? To discover that, hey, the thing everybody's afraid of is already here, right? And hey, guess what? You don't hate it.
I have one more.
Paula, have your hand.
Yeah, the really conservative budget people. You know, we have other things that are really putting pressure on our budget, which we do actually. A couple of schools that have to be redone, and you know, costs have gone up. And so let's take it easy for now and do the minimum, because you know, we're not sure we're going to be able to absorb the additional costs that would come from an increase in population. And these are like reasonable people. So it's tough.
I don't have a great answer there,
Yeah.
but this is something that we talk about a lot in the policy space. We make all these decisions, and municipalities have so much responsibility. Local control comes with responsibility, but they don't always have capacity. And so we're asking a lot of municipalities when we're talking about rezoning, when we're talking about infrastructure. It's a lot to plan, and a lot of municipal staff just isn't either we don't have the staff capacity or we don't have the expertise. And so they wind up relying a lot on RPAs, regional planning agencies, and other state support. But it's a problem, and a problem that I don't know a way around. You know, some decisions probably shouldn't be made at the local level. Some responsibilities probably shouldn't be at the local level. It becomes really hard to do anything, and it always feels like a zero-sum game. And that's why, you know, planning towards your budget can be scary, because you're cutting responsibilities, you're cutting things that you care about, you're cutting things that you think your town should be doing. But the reality is that there are really true capacity constraints.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say that I saw that last question about fiscal impacts, and it inspired me to think of a good pivot on that one, which is what are the fiscal impacts of having a shrinking population, an aging community? Do we know that? Like, you're right. I'm really concerned about the fiscal impacts of the future land use patterns in our community. I mean, I'm saying this as someone knows that multifamily housing actually is a net positive, particularly rental housing. It's a commercial use, pays a ton of taxes. But I think that's a great question. You know, like, well, what happens if we shrink? What would be the person saying that may not know the answer, and then you both have to kind of confess. Right.
Thanks. That's good. We've also been playing with it's not going to get built tomorrow. Like, the stars have to line up for any of this stuff to happen, you know, for people to take advantage of the zoning. So, you know, it's down the road.
Yeah, I think it's always a helpful reminder to say that zoning isn't an immediate change, right? This zoning is your community signaling the kind of development, the kind of community that they want to build and want to see happen. But development does take a really long time. I think the one way that I've seen that talking point backfire is that you want to be firm. We want to see production from this. And so we want zoning that's going to produce housing, and we shouldn't be shy or sheepish about saying that, right? And we should stand behind that statement with all that case making that we talked about at the beginning, because it's our values, because it's good for the community, and stand behind those things. Don't compromise on that. Great. This has been fantastic. Thank you all for staying a little bit later and chatting. This is always my favorite part of any kind of session, is hearing from people and just getting to talk about this stuff. So appreciate you all.
Awesome. And thank you so much to Tom and Matija. Thank you for staying late. Yeah, a little Zoom round of applause. Yeah, so all of our emails are in the chat. So if anyone, logs off and thinks of any more questions, feel free to reach out. And thank you so much for attending. See you all later.
Thank you.
Good night.